The first sign that something was profoundly wrong came the moment people began to gather at the cemetery. A small-town graveyard tucked between hills that had long forgotten laughter, where the air itself seemed to mourn in whispers. The clouds hung low, gray and heavy, blotting out the sun as if the sky itself refused to witness what was about to unfold. In the center, a tiny white coffin rested on a simple wooden stand, polished and gleaming, so impossibly small that it looked like a toy against the vastness of the earth surrounding it. Inside lay Emily, an 8-year-old girl whose life had been stolen suddenly by an illness so rapid, so cruel, that no parent, no neighbor, no teacher had time to brace themselves against the shock. Her mother stood near the coffin, rigid, clutching a small photograph of Emily smiling on her last birthday, hands trembling so violently that tears spilled freely down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. Mourners drifted around, their eyes flicking between the coffin and each other, unsure whether to offer comfort or to silently retreat. All voices hushed and shaky, as if speaking too loudly might shatter what little remained of their composure. Then, a movement caught their eyes, and a hush swept through the crowd before anyone could even realize what had happened. A dog appeared from the shadows between two gravestones, its fur matted and filthy, ribs visible beneath a coat that had not known care in weeks, perhaps months. No one had seen it arrive. One moment the grass was empty, the next there it was, lowering its body onto the ground at the foot of Emily's coffin as though drawn by some invisible tether, its head resting lightly against the smooth wood, eyes dark, unblinking, and full of an intensity that made people take involuntary steps backward. The priest cleared his throat, beginning the service, words floating into the damp, heavy air, but the dog did not move. It did not sniff, it did not whine. It simply watched, breathing shallowly, its gaze unwavering, as though guarding a secret that only it understood. When Emily's mother let out a guttural sob that shattered the quiet, the dog whimpered softly, a sound that was not loud, but somehow larger than the world, echoing into the hearts of everyone present. People shifted uneasily, whispers of stray, an animal barely escaping their lips, yet no one dared approach it. Then, a groundskeeper, uneasy and concerned for decorum, stepped forward with measured caution, hand outstretched to gently pull the dog away, thinking it might interfere with the solemn ceremony. The moment his fingers brushed the dog's collarless neck, a low, aching whine rose from the animal's throat, chilling everyone nearby. It was a sound that carried raw grief, pure anguish, and the unmistakable devotion of a heart unwilling to abandon someone it loved. The worker froze, then stepped back, realizing instinctively that this was no ordinary dog. The coffin was lowered into the earth with trembling hands assisting it, soil sliding down, and still the dog remained at the edge, whining, pacing, pressing its body against the coffin as though the weight of the dirt pressing down on Emily was a burden it must share. Flowers were placed, hands folded, prayers spoken, but attention repeatedly returned to the dog, to its unwavering vigil. By the time the mourners had departed, leaving the cemetery eerily quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant caw of a crow, the dog had not moved an inch. Rain began to fall in a light drizzle, cold and relentless, soaking the ground and the fragile flowers left atop the freshly turned earth. Still the dog stayed, lying down in the mud, soaked through, shivering violently but refusing to leave. The next morning, the sun rose pale and weak over the hills, and the dog was still there, eyes swollen, fur matted and dripping, refusing food and water, entirely focused on the grave it had chosen to guard. Residents of the town began to take notice. Mothers whispered to their children not to go near the grave. Farmers paused in the fields to watch the strange sight of this lone animal clinging to the memory of a girl, and even the local children, who often ran unchecked through the cemetery, stood in reverent silence at the dog's steadfast presence. Days turned into a week. The dog did not wander. It did not relent. People tried to coax it, feeding it scraps, speaking in soft tones, offering water, but each attempt was met with an almost sacred refusal. At night, when shadows crept across the hills and the world was swallowed in darkness, the dog remained, curled against the edge of the grave, head resting gently where Emily's body lay beneath the soil, the faintest sound of whimpering escaping into the night. Some whispered that the dog was bewitched, a spirit guardian sent from beyond, while others said it had belonged to Emily, perhaps a companion who could not bear to be parted from her, whose loyalty transcended all reason and understanding. Rumors spread slowly but persistently through the town, carried by those who had dared to linger, watching the silent devotion unfold. And it was during this time that a group of bikers arrived, rolling into town with engines low and rumbling, leather jackets heavy with rain, faces weathered by years of roads traveled and hardships endured, men who had seen life and death in forms most people could not imagine. They were there for another funeral, a friend, a brother lost to time. Yet when they saw the dog beside the small coffin, they stopped in their tracks, motorcycles idling as the heavy weight of the scene held them fast. The dog did not flinch at the roar of the engines. It did not rise. It simply lifted its head slowly, eyes meeting theirs with a haunting depth that silenced even the hardest men among them. One of the bikers knelt down, voice low and careful, speaking softly as if even words could break the spell, and the dog simply watched. Another poured water, and the dog sniffed once, then turned back toward the grave, never breaking its vigil. That night, even as the bikers sat around their bikes, the image of the dog pressed to the coffin, rain dripping from its fur, burned itself into their minds. They could not stop thinking about it. They could not leave it behind. Something was calling for their attention, something that demanded truth, justice, and understanding, and though none of them knew it yet, the dog's unwavering loyalty was only the first chapter in a story far more shocking and heart-wrenching than anyone in the town could have imagined. Its presence was not merely a sign of mourning. It was a beacon, a silent messenger, a clue to a secret hidden in plain sight, one that would soon unravel in ways that would shock the bikers, the town, and the world itself, proving that devotion can transcend death, grief can manifest in unexpected forms, and a small dog's loyalty could uncover a truth no human had dared to face. The bikers returned the next day, engines silent this time, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing on them like a physical force, and even hardened men who had ridden through storms, accidents, and death on the highways felt a shiver of unease as they approached the grave. The dog was there still, lying rigid, body tense, ears pricked as if it had been waiting for them to come back, and the sight of it made the air heavier, almost impossible to breathe, as though the grief clinging to the little girl's grave had seeped into every blade of grass around it. One of the bikers, the tallest among them with a gray-streaked beard and hands scarred from years of riding and brawling, stepped closer slowly, careful not to startle the animal, and noticed something he hadn't seen before. Faint marks along the dog's neck, impressions that suggested it had been tied, perhaps even restrained, in the past, but released, removed, or abandoned in a cruel manner. A younger biker crouched beside the grave, hands pressed against the cold earth, and noticed that the soil around the coffin seemed disturbed beyond what normal burial would require, soft in places, uneven as if something had been hidden and then removed. He frowned, that gut feeling he had learned to trust over years of danger prickling in his chest, and motioned to the others, quiet urgency in his eyes. For the first time, the bikers began asking questions to the few townspeople brave enough to speak with strangers, voices low and careful, carrying the weight of suspicion and secrecy. Slowly, reluctantly, they pieced together a picture of Emily's last days. She had lived mostly alone, her father having passed years earlier, her mother overworked and distracted, and neighbors reported she sometimes disappeared into the alleys behind the apartment building, where she would be seen talking to someone, or something, no one else could identify. Whispers of neglect mixed with fear, but the bikers were not the kind to judge without seeing. They returned to the cemetery at dusk, the fading light casting long shadows across the fresh grave, and found the dog digging furiously at the edge, paws clawing into damp soil, nose pressed against something buried beneath the surface. Blood and dirt mingled on its fur. Yet the dog did not flee, did not protest. Its devotion was unshakable, and for a moment, the bikers watched in stunned silence, realizing that whatever bond tied this animal to the girl went far deeper than mere companionship. One of them, voice rough and trembling, reached out, gently restraining the dog, but the animal strained, whining desperately, urging them forward. as if begging them to uncover the secret buried alongside Emily. Against every instinct, every law of propriety, the bikers agreed to investigate. They arranged for the grave to be carefully exhumed, coordinating with someone they trusted to handle the process quietly, to ensure that the truth could not be hidden by fear, shame, or the town's uneasy silence. The dog remained at the grave during the entire procedure, trembling, yet unyielding, eyes locked on the coffin, as if it understood that revelation was coming. When the coffin was finally opened, the air grew heavy, thick with the smell of earth and damp wood, and several bikers had to turn away, struggling to contain the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm them. Inside, the little girl's body lay perfectly still, innocent in appearance, yet the evidence of what had happened to her was undeniable. Bruises marked her small arms and legs, patterns no illness could explain, and tucked carefully beside her was a scrap of chewed fabric, the kind of material one might use to bind or restrain, tattered and worn, the very same type that had been spotted hidden behind her apartment building. It was a scene that provoked rage and grief in equal measure, leaving the bikers silent for long moments, absorbing the shocking truth that a child had suffered in ways no one had witnessed, and that the faithful dog had been the only witness who stayed behind, guarding, protecting, and refusing to abandon her even in death. They documented everything quietly, carefully, ensuring that no detail would be lost, every mark, every fragment of fabric, every subtle sign that Emily had been hurt, ignored, and left alone in her final days. The dog paced as the coffin was closed again, sniffing at the edges, whining softly, but its gaze remained locked on the small mound, a quiet reminder that loyalty could endure far beyond fear, pain, or human understanding. Once the town authorities were informed, the bikers, together with a few trusted allies, ensured that justice began to unfold, not quickly, not neatly, but with determination. They provided evidence, testimony, and insight, explaining what had been uncovered and why no one else had noticed the warning signs until it was far too late. And through it all, the dog remained unwavering, lying at the foot of the grave, refusing to leave until it was certain that Emily's story would not be buried again in silence. The bikers began to take shifts, staying near the dog at night, guarding the small grave against vandalism or further neglect, forming a bond with the animal that mirrored its devotion to the child it had loved. Stories of the dog's actions spread through the town like wildfire, bringing tears, remorse, and, in some hearts, a spark of hope that even in tragedy, loyalty and love could not be extinguished. By the end of the week, a sense of cautious closure settled over the cemetery. The dog, though still thin, matted, and exhausted, had earned a place of honor beside the little girl, and the bikers realized that their presence had been required not merely as witnesses, but as protectors of truth, guardians of a story the world might have overlooked. For the first time, the dog lifted its head, eyes glistening with what seemed almost like recognition, as if acknowledging that the bikers had understood the depth of its devotion, the gravity of what it had witnessed, and the necessity of revealing the secret that no one else had dared to uncover. The town, forever changed, now looked upon Emily's grave not with sorrow alone, but with respect for a silent guardian whose courage and loyalty had forced the unveiling of a truth far too many had tried to ignore, proving that sometimes, the smallest witnesses are the bravest, the quietest voices the loudest, and the love of a child and her dog could move even hardened men to tears, reflection, and unwavering action, and that story, terrifying as it was, marked the beginning of healing, justice, and the reminder that devotion, once forged, could never be broken. After the shocking revelations at the grave, the bikers knew they could not leave the dog behind, nor could they abandon Emily's story to the shadows of neglect and secrecy that had allowed her suffering to go unnoticed. They had seen too much, felt too deeply, and understood in their bones that justice, no matter how delayed, must be carried forward, and so they arranged for the dog to come with them, wrapping its trembling body in a worn leather jacket to protect it from the rain as they loaded it carefully into the back of a pickup truck. The animal, exhausted from days of sleepless guarding and unrelenting grief, rested its head against the side of the vehicle, eyes still fixed in that same haunted way, as if it feared that the world would betray Emily one final time. Back at their clubhouse, the bikers created a small, warm space for the dog, a bed of blankets and old jackets, food and water, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, the dog curled into something resembling comfort, though its eyes never lost the shadow of vigilance. Meanwhile, the bikers worked tirelessly to ensure the truth reached the right people, the authorities who could not ignore the evidence, whose hands could finally bring accountability for what had happened to Emily. And as they moved through paperwork, phone calls, and meetings, the dog became a silent, steady presence, occasionally nudging them, reminding them of the life they had promised to protect. Word spread through the town slowly, as stories often do, of the bikers, the little girl, and the dog that refused to leave her grave. Children whispered about it in playgrounds, neighbors murmured about it in cafes, and even strangers passing through could feel the weight of a tale that combined tragedy and loyalty in a way few had ever witnessed. The dog became a local legend, a symbol of devotion unbroken by fear, suffering, or even death, and people began to leave flowers not just for Emily, but for the animal that had stood guard, understanding without words the bond that tied them together. Months passed, and the bikers made sure the dog was cared for, visiting often, taking it on rides when the engine's rumble seemed to soothe the restless energy in its body. Slowly, the dog began to relax, shedding some of the tension and fear that had clung to it like a second skin. It would chase leaves, roll in the grass, rest its head in the laps of men who had once been strangers, but the moment they mentioned Emily's name or returned near the cemetery, the shadow would return, eyes widening, ears pricked, as though it was suddenly a little girl again, waiting for someone to notice, to protect, to remember. One chilly morning, the bikers returned to the cemetery. Now months since the grave had been reopened, flowers fresh and bright atop the soil. The dog, now stronger, but still lean and wiry, stepped forward carefully, sniffing at the dirt, nose brushing the grass, then sat down, tail curled around its legs, gaze fixed on the small mound of earth. The bikers, helmets in hand, stood silently, understanding that this was the culmination of their journey, a moment of respect and acknowledgement for the unwavering devotion that had carried through death itself. As they knelt, one of them whispered a promise, rough voice breaking with emotion, that they would never abandon Emily, never abandon her memory, and never abandon the dog that had taught them all what true loyalty meant. News of the dog's actions reached a wider audience when a local journalist wrote a careful piece, focusing not only on the tragedy but on the remarkable devotion of the animal and the unexpected heroism of the bikers, whose willingness to listen, investigate, and act had uncovered a truth most adults had failed to see. Letters and messages arrived, some from strangers moved to tears, others from those who had been victims themselves, finding courage in the story to stand for justice and protection in their own lives. Through all of it, the dog remained steadfast, a quiet observer and participant in a world that had seemed too cruel for something so innocent. Its body lean but strong, eyes watchful, ears twitching at every sound, tail still wagging faintly, though always with measured care, a reflection of its cautious heart. And then came the day when the bikers brought the dog back to the cemetery, not out of obligation, but out of reverence, a ritual of remembrance and respect. They brought flowers, knelt at the mound, and spoke softly, telling Emily about the lives she had touched even in death, the changes her story had inspired, and the attention it had drawn to the need for vigilance, compassion, and protection of those who could not speak for themselves. The dog stayed beside them, head lowered, occasionally lifting a gaze to the coffin as if ensuring Emily could hear the words, could understand that love and loyalty had triumphed over neglect and suffering, and that no child, no matter how small, should ever feel abandoned again. That day, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, casting pale light over the cemetery, illuminating the white coffin, the fresh flowers, the tall grass, and the dog that had never left, a living testament to devotion, courage, and unbreakable bonds. The bikers rode home that evening with the dog nestled between them on the seat of a motorcycle, wind in their hair, rain-washed roads glistening beneath the headlights, feeling a mixture of sorrow, relief, and awe at the extraordinary loyalty they had witnessed, the truth they had uncovered, and the healing they had facilitated. They knew the dog's journey with Emily's story was far from over. In its heart, the little girl's memory would always live, guiding its actions, shaping its spirit, and reminding everyone who had been touched by this tale that love, even in the most unexpected forms, could endure beyond death, could awaken courage in the living, and could inspire justice, compassion, and the willingness to fight for what is right, no matter the cost, proving that sometimes the quietest witnesses, the ones who cannot speak, who cannot articulate their grief in words, hold the greatest truths, and that a dog's unwavering loyalty, coupled with the determination of those willing to listen, could illuminate darkness, heal wounds, and leave a legacy of hope, love, and devotion that would be remembered for years to come, echoing in the hearts of the town, the bikers, and anyone willing to believe that even in tragedy, there could be heroes, guardians, and miracles, small and silent, yet powerful beyond measure.